Now we're going to take a look at one of the most powerful array methods, the splice method. Splice allows us to do some very interesting operations on our arrays. So we've seen some methods for manipulating our actual values inside of our array. We saw how to, let's say, set a specific index using the square bracket notation, and we've seen how to add and remove elements from the beginning or the end of our array with push, pop, shift, and unshift. But what if we want to do a little bit more advanced manipulation of our array? Let's say we wanted to take my array, which is the numbers 0 through 6, and remove the element 2. Well, one thing that we could try to do is actually use a special keyword in JavaScript called delete. And this deletes a value. Let's say we wanted to delete the number 2, which is at index 2, conveniently. So we could say my array of index 2. So let's do console.log my array.toString before we do our delete, as well as after, to see exactly what would happen. So if we refresh, we can see that the value is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but after we call the number 2, it's 0, 1, and this is actually undefined, but when we call toString, it's just represented by no characters, 3, 4, 5, 6. So all of the elements retain their same place, however, the index 2 is now undefined, and that's what delete will do. But that's not quite what I want. Instead, I want to remove element number 2 and have all of the elements after it move forward one index. So now the number 3 will be at index 2, the number 4 will be at index 3, and so on. I really want it to fill in that empty space. Delete doesn't offer us a way to do that. However, we can use a special powerful method called splice, and this is not to be confused with slice. There's a P in there. This is going to be for some interesting operations on our array. Let's say we want to remove the element 2 and move all of the following values down one array index. So what we can do is, let's just try this. We'll do my array.splice. And this will do a few different things, but let's just start with a simple case. The first argument is the index we want to operate on. In this case, we want to operate on the number 2, which is conveniently in index number 2. So we're going to be operating on 2. And then the second argument is how many elements past this index we're going to be operating on. So basically, we can think of it as how many elements after index 2 we want to remove. So if we think of index 2 as being right before number 2 here, we want to remove one element, which is the number 2. So to remove number 2, we'll just pass in the length of 1. And we're not going to pass in anything else, because the first two arguments are about removing elements from the array. So starting at index 2, remove one element from my array. So now if we go back and check it out, it's going to be a little bit different. We can see it starts as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but now it's 0, 1, and then there's no 2, and there's no undefined value. Instead, the 3 has taken the place of the 2, and all of them have moved forward one element. This is exactly what we want. So let's see what happens if we were to change these values around. If we change the length from 1 to 2, instead of just removing the element 2 from the array, it's going to start at index 2 and take 1, 2 elements out of the array. So what we should be left with is 0, 1, 4, 5, and 6. So if we refresh, we can see we get 0, 1, 4, 5, and 6. So Splice's most common use case is to remove one element from an array. And the pattern you can think of is you're going to call splice with the index of the element you want to remove and the length of 1. So if we want to remove the fourth element of the array, we call splice with 4 and 1. And boom, the fourth has been taken out of our array. Now this is just a little piece of what Splice does. Again, we've only looked at the first two arguments. And like I said, those first two arguments are all about removing elements from the array. But anything that comes after those two arguments are going to be added to the array. So this can do some pretty powerful stuff. So let's say before the 2, I want to add in the string TWO, or the string 2. So what will I do there? Well, I'm going to be operating around index 2 here, so my index is going to be 2. However, I don't want to remove anything. I don't want to remove the 2, I just want to add something in. So the number of elements I want to remove is actually 0. So we can just go ahead and say to 0. But now anything after that is going to be inserted right at the index that we gave as our first argument. So let's say I want to pass in TWO. So now if we take a look, we'll see that we haven't removed anything. Instead, we've inserted an element into our array, and everything has been moved back to facilitate its insertion. So now the number 2 exists at index 3, the number 3 is at index 4, and so on. If we wanted to replace a single element in the array, we could change this and say the number of things that we want to delete after index 2 is 1. So before it inserts anything here, it's going to start at index 2 like we saw before, remove one element, and then at index 2, it's going to insert the string. So what this effectively does is replace one index of our array. Now we wouldn't use this too often because we have a more convenient method using the square notation and using an assign. We could simply do my array of index 2 equals the string 2. So these two would be equivalent and you wouldn't really see this pattern done. However, if you wanted to remove the number 2 and add in a few extra things, like another string TWO capitalized and something else, we can add as many arguments after this as we want, and it'll continue to insert them in the middle of the string wherever our index is specified here. So if we refresh, we can see that the number 2 was removed because we removed one element. However, several things were added in its place: the lowercase string 2, the uppercase string 2, and the string with something else. So those are the basic use cases of Splice. It's easy to think about it as two steps. First, the first two arguments are talking about removing elements. So if you don't want to remove anything, you change the length or number of elements to 0. Or you can remove a bunch of things at once by calling something like this. So we're going to start at index 2 and remove 3 elements. And then anything after those two arguments are going to be inserted in its place. So if we take a look at this, because we passed in the index starting at 2 and took out 3 elements, the number 2, 3, and 4 are gone, and then all the extra arguments were inserted into their place. So that's how we can remove a single element from an array by simply using the index with the length 1 and no extra arguments. Or we could simply add in an arbitrary number of objects into our array by using this notation here by adding multiple arguments after the first 2 arguments. The first one being the most important, being the index where we're going to start inserting things. It's a little bit tough to remember. You can always look it up and you can always experiment to remember exactly how Splice works. But just remember, it's two separate things. It's removing elements from an array optionally, and it's also optionally adding elements back in. So if you think about what you want to do in terms of those two tasks, you can probably figure out how to do it with the powerful Splice method. So now we've seen the basic techniques and methods available in JavaScript arrays. We'll be using arrays a lot in the upcoming videos when we create our JavaScript programs.